Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Fortman, and I'm the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Labor. And I'm joined here this afternoon with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Kim Smith. I'm the Deputy Commissioner.
And we also have in the room with us Jess Picard and Isaac Gingras. First of all, I want to thank you for making time on a Friday afternoon to meet with us and to get an update on unemployment insurance. And while I recognize that the intent of today's conversation is really to provide information for legislators, I'm also aware that many citizens across the state of Maine are also joining by Facebook. So I do want to acknowledge that there are people who are listening in who will not have the opportunity to ask questions, but legislators, of course, can either put their questions in the chat box or unmute themselves and ask questions that way as well. As we've done in the past, what we'll do is do a kind of a top line overview of what we've seen and what's happened in the past week around unemployment insurance. We've gathered some of your questions and hopefully we'll be able to at least touch on those as we do the presentation and then open it up to questions after we get through that. So I think with that, I've been promising you that we will have a dashboard. What we're going to show you today is the beginning of that dashboard, or the evolution of the dashboard. So Jess, can you put the first slide up there, please? So this slide may look familiar to you. It is the graph that we've used in the past that really is tracking what we're seeing around initial claims in unemployment insurance. And what is not apparent on that, the graph itself, is the fact that between the regular state unemployment insurance program and the federal unemployment insurance programs that have been ramped up since March, we have paid out over $1 billion since March 15th in unemployment insurance benefits. Now, that last week we paid out approximately $75 million for the week that ended July 4th. And to just put that in context, in the entire year of 2019, we paid out $74 million in benefits for the entire year. For the week ending July 4th, we received about 2,800 initial claims for state unemployment insurance, and as well as about 2,300 in pandemic unemployment assistance. And just as a reminder, there are 3 federal unemployment insurance programs that are federally funded 100%. One is pandemic unemployment assistance. That's the program that covers people who are not traditionally covered by state unemployment insurance, such as people who are gig workers, do not have enough monetary earnings, or are self-employed. And that program runs through December of 2020. The other federal program is federal pandemic unemployment compensation. And that's the program that I'm sure you're very familiar with, which provides an additional $600 in benefits to anyone who is receiving at least $1 in unemployment insurance from either the state unemployment insurance program or any of the federal unemployment insurance programs. And then, excuse me, the third federal unemployment insurance program is the pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. And that is the federal program that provides an additional 13 weeks of benefits to people who have exhausted their state unemployment insurance or any of the other programs. So we've received roughly 168,000 initial claims since March 15th. that were for state unemployment, as well as about 77,000 initial claims for the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. Now, claims do not equal people, and we keep trying to stress that the claims numbers are more of a production number. It's, it keeps track of almost the, like the widgets. How many claims do you have to process? The actual number of individual claimants is approximately 150,000 individual claimants have applied for benefits from one of these programs. And the rate that we're processing claims is at about 83% of all claims since March have been processed through July 4th. And I keep using the end of the week numbers because that's the way that we have to report information to the US Department of Labor. So there's always about a little bit of a lag time as we're reporting those numbers.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that is why we report on both the number of claims. The number of claims is the required number that we have to report to the United States Department of Labor. But we are also tracking the number of people that are impacted, the number of people that those claims represent. One other thing I wanted to mention, the Commissioner was talking about the 3 federal programs that were created through the CARES Act. The CARES Act also provided some funding, partial funding for employers who are direct reimbursable employers. And we've had some, we got some questions. Yes, we do have some good news. Congress has acted this week to clarify the reimbursement for 50% of those costs that are attributable to direct reimbursable employers. So those are employers that don't pay the unemployment taxes. They would pay typically 100% of any unemployment benefits that are paid to their former employees. So what the new legislation this week that we believe will be going to the president very shortly would allow us to only bill those direct reimbursable employers for 50% and then get their reimbursement for the other 50% directly from the federal government.
And I know many of you may think, well, isn't that what the CARES Act said? Because that's when we first started hearing about the 50% for direct reimbursable employers. And if you're thinking about direct reimbursable employers, those are certain nonprofits, they may be hospitals, could be government entities. And yes, that was what was written in the CARES Act. However, the US Department of Labor had provided guidance saying that states must first bill those entities for 100% of the cost before they could be reimbursed. We submitted a waiver request to the US Department of Labor. That request was denied, and we were continuing to advocate for a mechanism that would allow us to just bill those direct reimbursable employers 50%. And as the Deputy Commissioner said earlier this week, Congress did pass legislation, and I think that is good news for those direct reimbursable employers. Just want to go to the second slide. This slide here is part of the information that we wanted to begin providing to you on a weekly basis. So as I said, that through July 4th, we have paid benefits to roughly 83% of the people who have filed claims. So that's the dark blue circle. And then we've broken out the rest, the other 17%, and identified those categories. The first category in the light blue, that 3% category, is currently ineligible. And you may be asking yourself, who's not eligible for unemployment insurance, either through the state program or through one of the federal programs these days? That group of people, first of all, I do want to say that there are folks who are not eligible for any of those programs. And we'll go through that a little bit more later on in the slide deck. But basically, this particular group of people are people who are have excessive earnings. As you remember, there's a maximum weekly benefit. Before June 1st, the maximum weekly benefit was $445, and you were allowed to earn up to $5 more than that before you would be losing your benefits. So anyone before June 1st who was making more than $450 a week would not have been eligible for unemployment benefits if they were receiving the maximum benefit amount. Many people are not eligible for the maximum weekly benefit amount. Many folks are eligible for the average benefit is roughly $350. So if anyone was earning more than $5 more than that, they would not be eligible for unemployment during that week that they earned that. You will also know that under pandemic unemployment assistance, the weekly benefit that people are receiving is $172. So if they are earning more than $177, they would not be eligible for unemployment benefits during that week. And we'll talk a little bit more about pandemic unemployment assistance in a few minutes because I know people have questions about that. But I just wanted to give you kind of a top line overview. That's who's in that light blue bucket. In the 2% red slice on that pie chart, those are the folks who have been flagged for potential fraud. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about fraud in a minute. As you know, starting in about mid-May, we were hit with a number of fraudulent claims. We've been working closely with our federal partners as well as state law enforcement and Treasury and others to address that issue. But I just wanted to identify that about 2% of the people who are currently in the not processed fall into that category. 7% in the blue, the lighter, I guess that's a medium blue, we're waiting for some sort of action on the part of the claimant. And the action that we're waiting for is, these are folks who may have filled out an initial claim, but have not filed weekly certifications. The trigger for receiving benefits is that weekly certification being filled out. We have been sending emails once a week to folks in this category, encouraging them to fill out their weekly certifications. We've seen a little bit of movement in this group of people, not a lot. The next thing that we are doing is we are sending out a hard copy through U.S. Postal Service to anyone in this category and asking them to complete their weekly certifications. Some of the people may not be filling the weekly certification out because they may have gone back to work, or their employer may have received a loan and they may be getting paid through that. We don't know why they have not filled out their weekly certifications, but that's that group in the 7%. So once you eliminate those categories, or at least understand those categories, the folks that we've been primarily focused on are that 5% in the orange slice of the pie there under being processed. So Kim, I don't know if you wanted to start walking through that being processed group.
Sure. And actually, I think if we skip to the next slide, because we have a breakdown of what makes up that 5%. So the graph on the right-hand side takes that 5% slice and breaks it into additional categories. And the two biggest categories are those folks that are waiting for fact findings and those who are pending status. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. So the fact findings, as you know, we've been scheduling out. We're scheduling out into August at this point. But what we're trying to expedite those fact findings we've been talking about bringing on additional staff. We've had law students on for a few weeks now. So we are going through the schedule and looking at what we already have paperwork on through the separation notices that employers submitted based on the information that people put on their initial claim, and doing a paper review and making a determination. Do we have enough information to make a decision right now without waiting for the fact finding? And if we do have enough information, then we will issue a determination. And we do want to let people know that if either the individual or their employer disagrees with the decision that we issue, either party has the right to appeal that decision. But we think this is a good way to get through those fact findings as quickly as we can.
And also, as we're doing that, there's part of the process, again, to protect people's rights, both the employee and the employer. There is a 5-day notice. Part of what we're trying to do is expedite that process. So people may be contacted the first question, and they may be contacted prior to when their fact finding is scheduled. If that happens, the first question that they will be asked is, are you willing to waive your 5-day notice? And people have the absolute right to say, no, I want to wait for my fact finding. I don't want to waive the notice. They may not feel that they're appropriately prepared if we're contacting them ahead of time. But our goal is to reach out to people and to begin handling as many of these cases as possible. Some of the reasons for fact finding are also on the screen. People may have refused work that was offered. There may be questions about self-employment. There may be questions about voluntarily quitting a job. Those are all issues that need to be resolved prior to someone being determined to be eligible for unemployment insurance. The other thing is that, and I know probably several of the people who are participating today have raised the issue of, I was contacted by a constituent who said they were scheduled for fact finding and no one got back to me. I waited by my phone, there was no one there, what is going on? When we took time, many of us were, on Friday, our goal was to take a day where we were not having phone calls coming in and just really focus on some of the systems that we were using, and fact finding was our #1 priority last Friday. So as we were doing a deeper dive into what are some of the processes and how could we fix them, we're also digging into some of the questions that we had heard, and in particular about why is this happening, and why no one is getting back to the person and they weren't notified. And what we discovered was back in, I want to say it was April, where we had did an automatic decision making on some of the things like able and available and voluntary quits. When we lifted those, only half the process was completed. What inadvertently happened was that the claimants were still being notified of fact findings, but the adjudicators on our side were not being scheduled, so only half the process was happening. So that was our fault. We've identified it now. We are sorry that that's happened. All of the people that have been in that situation have been prioritized so that we are addressing those up front as we're moving forward. And we believe that we have that problem corrected moving forward. So, but if you hear from any of your constituents that that is happening moving forward, please let me know. And again, I apologize that that happened.
So the one last piece that I would like to add on fact findings is because we are trying to expedite those. When a decision is written, let's say someone has a fact finding at the end of July, but we write the decision now, we will include in that statement that the fact finding scheduled for such and such a date and such a time is canceled. So that will be their notification that the fact finding that was scheduled will no longer happen. And they will receive that determination both in their online reemploy me account, as well as they will get a paper copy of that through the mail.
Right, and so we encourage people to check both their correspondence folder in their online account, as well as anything that is sent in the mail. But that is true. That's how people will be notified. They'll also, that's when they would know if they disagreed with the decision that was made, that they should be filing an appeal at that point as well. So please read any material that that we send. And then, and I can't see it, but on the right-hand side over here are the other, so a big bucket of folks that we've been looking at fit into the awaiting fact finding. There is another bucket of people in the pending status. So these are folks that we have their information and their accounts, but there is some sort of a problem with the information that has been provided to us. And one of those is name mismatch. And I know some folks are like, well, that should be pretty easy to move through. I can't stress how challenging the fraud, the need of responding to fraud has been. That things that in the past we would have perhaps been a little bit less focused on have suddenly become much more important to us because we have been told by the USDOL, Office of Inspector General, that across the country, the potential for up to, they're estimating $26 billion in fraud is out there. The OIG is contacting us on a regular basis to make sure that, as is appropriate, that we are taking every reasonable step to do those two things and get benefits out to people who are eligible as quickly as possible, and at the same time maintain rigorous systems to catch and to prevent fraudulent claims from going out the door. So many of these items on the right-hand side, the name mismatch, the it's not really wage mismatch, but it's a discrepancy in the wages that have been reported to us, and Social Security number mismatch are all items that are important for us to verify before we can move forward. For the name mismatch, we have, again, on Fridays, we had a team working on this and have developed a more streamlined process and a potential automated solution that should cut down, should speed up our ability to verify this information. On the Social Security mismatch, all of our information is, and I don't know, Kim, if you want to walk through it with the Social Security Administration, or
yeah, we have every night we match new claims against information that is held with the Social Security Administration, as does all of the other states. And we have seen that there are waves, there are periods of time when there's a delay in getting a response back from the Social Security Administration simply because of the influx of claims that are coming in. So we are working with the Social Security Administration to make sure that our files are going through smoothly. But this is one of those things where there's just periods of time when there's a delay getting back, and it does result in a delay for certain people's claims to go through. But by far the largest group in this category is the name mismatch. And as the commissioner said, we have ways where we're automating spreadsheets and things like that to knock off some of the easier mismatches, and then leaving the more difficult things that really need to be looked at by a person.
Yep. And, as I've mentioned a number of times, one of the priorities for us is increasing our staffing levels. And by doing that, we will be able to address all of these issues, the awaiting the B1 and the disqualifications. B1s, these are the forms from employers. And this is some of the information around the wage data that we need. And those.
Yeah, it's part of our what is usually our normal process. We say after you submit an initial claim, if everything goes through, you would see your first payment within 10 to 14 days. That is the usual process. And that's what this group represents. And within that 10 to 14 days, we're waiting for information to come back from the employer on wages, on the circumstances involving the separation, that kind of thing. So that's what this group is waiting for. So that's actually the normal processing time. And then the last group, 10%, are those that have been disqualified. And we need to get them a PUA application.
Right. So those are folks who have been disqualified from state unemployment assistance. And then that, as the deputy said, the next step is to see if they are in fact eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance or not. So I had mentioned a moment ago about our hiring. I know we've received lots of questions about that. So far in the past couple of weeks, we've hired an additional 40 staff people who will be brought on. They're not here yet. The only additional staff we have on board are the folks that we hired through the call center, and the law students that we've talked about who are helping us with the fact finding that we're doing. But starting next Monday on July 13th, we're bringing on board about 24 new eligibility agents. We have tax specialists starting on July 20th. And then we have adjudicators joining us on July 27th. And we will continue to staff up throughout the summer for all of the positions that we've discussed before. And we do have that information posted in both the job bank and on the Maine.gov homepage as well. So if you know folks who are interested in joining us, please encourage them to look for the particular postings. The job descriptions are all there.
And they can be found on, if you go to maincareercenter.gov, you can access the Maine job link there. All of our jobs are posted there, as well as the commissioner said, if you go to the Maine.gov homepage, there is a link across the top for employment, and our jobs are also listed there.
And to just get back for a second to the basic kind of tenets of unemployment insurance. First of all, you must have lost a job through no fault of your own. You must be monetarily eligible. This is state unemployment, which is why we do all of this checking about wages. You must be able to work, available to work, and actively seeking work. And we're beginning to receive questions about what does that mean, actively seeking work during a time of COVID-19. And we had in place a work search waiver. Typically, when you fill out your weekly certification, one of the key components of that is, have you looked for a job? Where have you looked for a job? Or what work search activities are you engaged in? We have not had that particular screen showing up on the weekly certification since mid-March. We have the governor earlier this week extended the civil state of emergency. And that civil state of emergency also extends some of the provisions in the emergency state unemployment legislation until 30 days after the state of the emergency ends. So under the state emergency unemployment insurance, as long as you are connected to your employer, then the work search waiver is in place until 30 days after the state of emergency. For all other people, we did a waiver that made sense because businesses were closed, and we had the authority to extend that kind of work search. With the fact that we are opening, businesses are opening, we're receiving lots of requests from folks. We have over 10,000 jobs listed on the job bank. We've extended the waiver an additional week, and the requirement to begin doing job search does not go into effect for people who are permanently separated from their previous employer until July 19th. So the beginning?
That's the Sunday.
The
So
Sunday.
That's the start of the week in which people who are not connected to their employer, so they are permanently laid off, they are permanently out of work, starting on July 19th, they will need to start looking for work and reporting that on their weekly certification.
And we thought it might be helpful to just show what that screen looks like. So Jess?
And so July 19th is when they would need to start looking for work. So the first time they would report that would be on July 26th, which would be their weekly certification that they would file for the week ending July 25th.
So this is a draft of what that screen will look like, but we just thought it might be helpful to put that out there for you to see. And there are really two kind of key components. The first one is, did you look for work during the week claimed? And you have a yes or no answer. And the second question will be, did you participate in any career center, reemployment services, or workshops, attend a job fair, perform other search activity during the week claimed? Now these services, the career center services, are available online, and we are expanding those virtual opportunities as well so that people can begin doing this kind of work search from their homes. And we're also saying that if you are self-employed or if you are in contact with your previous employer, this is considered your work search. I know many people have been saying, how do I know which bucket I fall into? Am I somebody who must do this? What are you looking for? So this is going to be self-attestation. We will be, it will be entirely up to the individual to fill this information out truthfully. But you will know whether or not you're still in touch with the employer you worked for before, or if you are self-employed, you obviously know that as well. So if you're answering yes to the second question, on the right-hand side, there's a drop-down box, and other is one of the options in the drop-down box. And so if you're self-employed or returning to your previous employer, that is what you would indicate on that. I don't know if you can scroll up, Jess, or not. No. And again, this is a screen that typically is in every weekly certification. This is a regular ongoing requirement for being eligible for unemployment insurance.
And just before we move off of this, so everyone who's filing a weekly certification will see this screen.
Yes.
Whether or not you are in the folks that need to start looking for work at July 19th, or if you're in the group that has the waiver through September 5th, you will receive this question. And so you should answer based on what applies to you. Did you look for work? Yes or no? And if, especially if no, then are you self-employed or are you still connected? Are you still expecting to go back to work for your previous employer?
And
Before we move off this is Senator Bellows, and I apologize, I put it in the chat, but I just wanted to stay on that screen for a moment.
Sure.
I could imagine that someone said, you know, if someone's business were closed, you know, because of the pandemic, I could imagine them clicking no, not reading the fine print, which understandably is user error. But if that happens, are they able to call a career center staffer to get that fixed? If they call us and say, my unemployment has stopped, and it's clear that that might have been the problem, is there a different process than the process that we're using now to help people get that fixed?
So, Senator, you're saying they've answered no, I haven't looked for work, and no, I didn't participate in any.
Right, because your caveat is very helpful if people read closely, but an average person who didn't read that caveat might think, well, no, of course I'm not looking for work because I work at this bar that is still mandatorily closed, but I'm going back there as soon as we're allowed to open. So I just think from a common sense perspective, this is potentially an area where people who legitimately are exempt from the work search might see their unemployment stop because they answer no incorrectly. So my question is, can they correct that response through the Career Center potentially?
The process to correct that would be, we would schedule a fact finding,
Right.
And discuss with the individual what actually happened during that week, and then issue a determination to either allow or deny benefits.
So
I'm sorry, can I put it a different way?
Yeah.
Which is that we've been told that if you are still connected with your previous employer, you are exempt from the work search requirements, and I actually believe we passed that as a statute. And that's not reflected in the way this form is set up. Instead, you're requiring us to recharacterize continued contact as a work search. And I don't believe that that is in accord with what the legislature did in suspending work search requirements, because this is going to trap a lot of people, and then they're going to wind up in a fact finding rather than receiving their benefits.
So, I mean, we can look at this again. We've been working with the Attorney General's office on it, and we can bring that back there to see if there is a different way that we could do this while still being in compliance with the law. I do want to clarify one thing though. This is done on a weekly basis. So if someone this would not stop someone's unemployment for multiple weeks unless that was how they answered the questions multiple weeks moving forward. But we can definitely look at this and see if there's another way that we can address this. Was there another question?
I think you've answered that question about this form, and I appreciate your willingness to look at another way. I think Representative Fecto has put a suggestion in the chat that might work. And I hear and it is reassuring to know that if someone calls us and says, I didn't get benefits for this week, we can sort of explore with them the work search issue.
Yep.
But I think all of us are concerned that this definitely will lead to some pretty widespread confusion, especially for low information applicants. Because from a common sense perspective, that first question just is really confusing. So thank you. Oh, and my video is on, even though I'm in the parking lot of a hospital because a family member is in the hospital.
Oh, no.
So thank you.
No, thank you. And we'll look at, yeah, okay. I can see the question. It's hard for me to read everything that's in the chat box, but we'll definitely look at that. The other question that we've received frequently is from employers who have said that they're offering work and that employees are refusing it, and they want to let the department know. There is a website that that employers can go to and report that information. And again, this is one of the reasons that we would have fact findings. And the email address is www.maine.gov/unemployment/UCBR/. One of the other things, and it sounds like we've already gotten some good information for the FAQs, but we do plan to update the FAQs with information about work search. And so if you have additional suggestions, please get those to us, so that, you know, our goal is to have the information as clear as possible, and at the same time, make sure that, you know, we are complying with the multiple state and federal requirements that we need to comply with. I think that last week we received a question that I promised to get back to Representative McCreate about, and I neglected to do that. And it was about a constituent who was self-employed. And Kim, it was how do you answer the questions again? How do you fill out these forms? What am I supposed to put in there? What boxes, especially for self-employed people who may be working but not earning any money? What is it that they're supposed to be doing?
Sure. So on the weekly certification, there are two particular questions that I wanted to talk about. Question 5 is, did you work or perform any services during the week? So this would be work or perform services for another employer, yes or no. And if you yes, then there's another screen that you'll be taken to enter information. If you're self-employed, however, you're not working for another employer, you're working for yourself. So the answer to that question would be no. So question 6, did you have any earnings through an odd job for the week? So folks that are just reopening, that are required to report their net income. So that's their earnings less any expenses. And our guidance has been to use the IRS Schedule C to identify on a weekly basis what income and expenses are. If it ends up being a negative, so that there was no income reported that week, you can simply put a 0 in that box. That is okay to do.
I think the question was asked again, so I think we...
So I'm here, actually.
Hi.
Let me take off my earphones. So that doesn't actually answer my question. My question is, at the very beginning, when it asks if you have returned to work, if you are self-employed, but you have returned to work, but you are not making any profit, is it going to trigger something in the system if you report that you have returned to work, but keep reporting that you haven't earned any income?
No.
I'm just looking down through the questions.
I think
It should not.
Yeah.
Genevieve is asking about the same sort of situation. It sounds like the one I asked last week and put in the chat again today. Her question to me was, what am I supposed to do with number 5? And you just said she should put no.
Correct.
Or number 6, if she's not making enough, if her expenses are more than her income, she puts in 0.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that? This is Representative Peirce. I have a person who's a sole proprietor, and she finally got some funding from you through a process, but you're mailing her the B1 form, and does she need to fill that out?
So we did have some folks who started receiving B1s from us. This is part of our quarter change process. And people who are on PUA, of course, are not normally part of the system. So with the quarter change, we are required to go back and do a reassessment of an individual's eligibility for state unemployment, so that we, if not if they are eligible for state unemployment, we are required to move them back to that program. If they're not eligible, then we could continue paying them on PUA. And I believe because with the quarter change, we're going back and looking for new wages to be coming in for that individual. And because there's nothing, it triggered out sending that B1, the separation form. But that's a process that we're looking at. They do not need to refill that out and send it in.
But we are looking at that.
But do they have to fill an initial one out or just not fill one out at all?
This is for a sole proprietor, Senator.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should not be getting the B1s. And
okay, it was just an error then that she got that.
Yeah,
okay.
That's my understanding, but we've got that on a list of things that we're looking at. We're in the beginning of a quarter change, and so that's a time when, as the deputy said, we have to do a lot of reassessment of claims. You may see some people who are currently receiving pandemic unemployment assistance who may get shifted over into regular state UI. This should not happen for sole proprietors or self-employed, but some of your other constituents who may be receiving pandemic unemployment assistance because they did not have enough wages. If that has changed, they may be moving on to a different program because of the quarter change. But they would be notified, and it's a requirement for us. As you know, you can only be eligible for pandemic unemployment assistance if you are not eligible for state unemployment assistance. So every time there's a quarter change, we need to verify that eligibility still exists for pandemic unemployment assistance because it does not exist for state unemployment.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? So the situation I've run into is numerous commercial fishermen who are incorporated, and so they are receiving the B1, and they do need to complete it before they receive benefits. But my question is the Maine Career Center authorized to help them complete that paperwork?
Help them complete the B1?
Yes. One of them was told, spoke with an aide who said that they could get walked through how to fill out the wage separation paperwork by someone at the Maine Career Center.
That is not part of their typical training, but I think during this this pandemic, the Career Center staff have been stepping up and performing lots of tasks that normally are outside their scope of work. So I wouldn't want to make a blanket statement that would not be something that they are normally trained to do. But we had roughly 78 out of our about 100 staff from career centers who have received some limited unemployment insurance training. And so I'm sure that there are folks who have done that. We have not received a lot of requests for help with filling out B1s. If that's something that you're seeing a need for, it's something that we could try to do a specialized training on for a group of our career center staff. But I just wouldn't want to start referring people there because that's not something that they're normally trained on.
Thank you. I've only had a couple of people that ran into that, but I was just curious if that was a resource that we should promote or that was just, they got lucky happenstance on that one. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, you're welcome.
Can I ask another follow-up on the topic you were just discussing?
Sure.
It seems that a number of folks were, they've stopped being paid because of this quarter change. They were reported as insufficient earnings this week, suddenly and without notice. And the only thing that they see is that suddenly they are no longer on the PUA program, they're back on regular UI, and now they're not getting a check. That means car payments aren't being made, rent can't be paid, daycare bills, whatever else it might be that these people were relying on that check for. The last time around, those people then wound up taking several weeks before they could get switched back to PUA. And this is a real issue. So I understand that you guys need to decide behind the scenes whether this gets billed back to the state trust fund or to the feds. But there's really no question that these folks continue to be eligible for unemployment insurance. So I'm confused as to why their checks didn't go out this week and when you can assure us they will start going out again, because these people cannot afford another 3 or 4 weeks waiting for the system to switch them back to PUA. They are eligible. We need to keep paying them.
I would say I agree with that statement. We expected that it would be a simultaneous a check of state UI eligibility and a continuation of PUA, and it's something it's at the top of our list to look at so that we can continue them moving and getting paid.
Okay, this happened on Tuesday. So where are we in that timeline of looking at it?
I don't have a list of people that this has happened to, but that's something that we can check.
Yeah, we'd have to get back to you on that.
So I'm trying to.
Are there other questions?
I have a question. I've heard from at least 2 people, one of whom was a constituent and one of whom was not, that there hadn't been a response from the department to questions from other New England Department of Laborers in terms of
Wages?
Yes, in terms of wages for people who either had moved or had been working out of state but living in state, and that say Massachusetts Department of Labor had not heard from Maine DOL, and New Hampshire Department of Labor had not heard from Maine DOL. So where do those people fall, and are they in part of your chart, your pie chart? Are they part of the 100%?
So they would be getting wages, they would be getting unemployment from Massachusetts or New Hampshire. I'm not aware that we have a backlog in responding to requests from other states. I know that we have a backlog of getting responses back from other states. So it's not as though I can double check for you for next week, but I am not aware that we have a backlog in responding to other states for wage data.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And just as a quick follow-up to that, so are the out-of-state requests and concerns or the cross-state requests and concerns part of the data that you showed us when you show us a pie chart that amounts to 100%?
I'm saying yes, but I want to be really careful about how I'm saying yes. When we do our claims data, so that's data that we do on a weekly basis, that claims data is adjusted based on information of people who we're getting wage data from other places and they're actually being paid here. So it may be, Kim, what's the right word, where it's like partial wages from other states. But that is all included in the wage data.
Yeah, and that's that I flagged it as wage mismatch on the pending issues slide.
But if so we do share that information. It's on a weekly basis. Those numbers are recorded because all states have to report those to the US Department of Labor. But where the person actually gets counted, I believe, is in the state where the benefit is paid from. So there may be people who are Maine residents who may have Massachusetts earnings, but they would be counted in our Maine numbers. And if we have Maine people who are actually receiving unemployment benefits in Massachusetts or New Hampshire or New York, that's where those official numbers would probably be counted, but let me verify that.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah?
Commissioner, I have a different question.
Sure.
So there is now an upload PUA income documentation tab that has appeared in some people's reemploy me accounts, but no instructions are available, and there hasn't been any announcement by DOL that I'm aware of. So I'm confused as to why that's appearing, and then what documents are going to be required and when. And I want to say a little bit more about that, which is that apparently the reemploy me screen says that 6 months of income documentation are needed, which is quite confusing because Schedule C's are actually for 12 months. All tax documents are for 12 months. And as far as I can tell, the computer system also doesn't say which 6 months of income documentation are needed. So I want to encourage you to actually consult with small business owners who are receiving PUA before making these screens live, so that they can read them and try and understand them and know whether they can respond to them appropriately or not, making sure that the instructions are both practical and clear for Maine small business owners on PUA. Can you give us a timeline and some more clarity around why some people are seeing that tab without any information about it?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Senator. That was something I wanted to bring up and forgot. That was actually an error that is not live. That was part of a test that unfortunately should have been kept in the test environment and is not is no longer up on any screens anywhere. When it does go live, there will be instructions prior to it being up and asking for information. Also, most people, I shouldn't say most, at least half of the people who are self-employed will not be required to upload any documents, and there will be clear information provided prior to the request for information. And I do want to encourage people to not, we will be sending out information to people either electronically or by mail or both prior to requesting their documentation. We've also had another situation last week when we met. I talked about now on the Reemploy Me site, there's the ability to upload ID verification for if you have had your claim flagged as fraudulent, you know, one of the 999s. We sent out letters to people last week encouraging them to provide that documentation. We thought it would be easier for folks to have that information right on the Reemploy Me page. And what we've seen is in the short time that we've had it up there, in addition to the people we have requested information from, we seem to have a number of people who are just uploading that information even though it's not necessary. So I hear very clearly what you're saying, Senator Sanborn, about you know, making sure that the information is widely dispersed to people about what we need and why we need it. But I would encourage people to please not upload information unless it's specifically requested.
And
Could I ask a follow-up? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If I could just add to that. So what you saw was not the final language. We will not be asking for only 6 months worth.
Right.
We will be asking for the 2019 tax data for the year.
Right. Yep.
My follow-up question, yeah, my follow-up question is about timing. Really critical deadline is about to hit. It's just 2 weeks or 3 weeks away when people are going to start receiving just $172 a week instead of $772 a week. That's the difference between families eating and not eating, as I know you guys are both well aware. And so I am really just urgently asking you on this call with 3 weeks notice that not just the income documentation be requested before those 3 weeks are up, but that the redeterminations be ready to roll by the time those 3 weeks are up. Because otherwise we're going to have an incredible crisis on our hands. We really are anyway, as I think you probably are also aware in terms of the level of poverty and need that is going to kick in August. But for our self-employed folks, we can avoid it if we simply get these computer systems to bend to our will as opposed to driving the show. So I'm really hopeful that you guys will press the vendors and whatever other processes forward in order to ensure that prior to the end of July, those redeterminations are done, they're retroactive, all of the back pay that is due is paid out in a timely way so that people are not starving in the beginning of August when we have the federal money available to pay them what they are owed.
We agree completely, and we have been working, long and hard to get this done, Senator, and we will continue to do so until it's been achieved. So,
Commissioner, I have a question.
okay, and we're just about.
Yep.
Yep.
Commissioner?
Yep.
Yes. Hi. I submitted a question to you written, but I just wanted to follow up. I do appreciate the updates that we're getting as far as our elevated claims and how many are being resolved. But if we have constituents who have gone months without seeing anything and we've elevated them multiple times, we have no way of knowing where in that pie chart they fall, whether it's for fact finding or for other reasons. Is there some way that we can have access to this information so that we can better serve our constituents and help them move along through the process? Because I have constituents who are saying we don't know why we're not getting anything and it's been months, and all I can say is I've elevated it.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question, and one of the things that we're trying to do is provide additional transparency about where people are at in the process, even if we cannot resolve their issue immediately. We know that sometimes just having a sense of what is the timeline, what is the issue, does give people something to use as a reference. I also, and so we will try to provide as much information as possible about the individual situation in the claims and which of these buckets they do fall into. And using that through the regular process with Isaac and Evie is, we'll get that back to you.
Commissioner, that is super helpful, and I know we're at time. This is Senator Bellows. But I just wanted to ask, for people who've been waiting for months, what I hear you saying is you're working through it, you'll try to provide more information about where they fall in the category. But can you just confirm they will receive their back pay even after the federal program ends once they get finally resolved, assuming that they were eligible, or in some cases they've started to get their new benefits, but they still haven't been made whole for the past, and that certainly created some anxiety.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate, Senator Bellows. Even though the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, the $600, is slated to expire the week ending July 25th, anyone who would have been eligible for those benefits and has not received them will get retroactive payments regardless of when that determination takes place. The other federal programs, the pandemic unemployment assistance, as well as the federal pandemic emergency compensation program, all go through December of 2020. The information about updating, and again, and Senator Sanborn, I hear what you say about the desperate need to get things done in the next 3 weeks. And we are focused on doing that. I also want to say, if for whatever reason, perhaps the individual doesn't have their tax information in that time frame, the program does run through December of 2020, and we will be accepting that tax data from people through the rest of the year. So even if they do not have the data available when the system for uploading it becomes live, they do have until December of 2020 to submit that information to us, and we would be doing that redetermination, and it would be retroactive as well. So I think that's about it. With that, I want to just thank you again, and we will update the FAQs on work search, and take the good feedback that we've received today into consideration as we move forward on this. So again, thank you very much.